America, are you listening? Because it's death by 1,000 cuts to democracy. And the latest blow, the Fourth Estate, the independence of media, is now on its knees. Why? Because that $8 billion merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media has now been approved by the Trump administration's FCC in a narrow 2-to-1 vote, the lone holdout being a Democratic commissioner by the name of Ana Gomez. In a 2-to-1 vote, that merger has now been approved. I don't have to tell you, at $8 billion, the billionaires continue to get richer under the Trump administration. But let's talk about how this ended up happening, because the facts are important here. If you will recall, Trump made some bullshit $20 billion lawsuit against CBS News, wherein he claimed that there was deceptive editing to a Kamala Harris interview back in 2024 during the presidential campaign. He alleged insanity like consumer fraud, and he alleged election interference because of alleged deceptive editing. And then in the end, we know that wasn't the case. And during the Biden administration, CBS was defending this lawsuit. But then suddenly, after Trump took office in January, and the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, started screaming that he was going to be coming with a chainsaw to a lot of these companies because of their DEI policies, etc., suddenly CBS settled for $16 million. And we were watching that lawsuit carefully, because if there was a lawsuit that could be defended, it would be that one, just like ABC News' lawsuit should have been defended. But CBS pays $16 million to Donald Trump. And as soon as that gets done, that settlement happens, what do we see? The keys to the kingdom are handed over. And the FCC suddenly says, oh my gosh, well, now we're going to approve this merger. And despite protestations otherwise by the Trump administration, by the FCC, etc., that settlement had nothing to do with the merger, we're not dumb. As Americans that are paying attention, we are not dumb. We see something that smells like a bribe, looks like a bribe, kind of sounds like a bribe, right? If you pay me this, you will get that. Okay? And instead of maybe turning over information and having the transparency so people can understand that that wasn't the case, instead you get total obfuscation, you get total hiding of things. And what happens? You end up getting this merger. So let's talk about what Skydance Paramount promised to the Trump administration's FCC to get this deal done. In a letter dated July 22nd from Skydance's top lawyer, these are the following commitments that are made to the FCC. 3 areas. 1, ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at Skydance and Paramount have been shut down because you can't have DEI, right? 2, appointing an ombudsman to review complaints of bias or other concerns involving CBS as part of ensuring viewpoint diversity. So in other words, we're going to install somebody who's basically going to be the person to whom you narc on other people if you think that viewpoint diversity is not being respected. And 3, investing in local news and working with the station affiliates to serve local communities. On its face, sounds like a great idea, right? But what's going to happen? The only viewpoint or perspective that's going to be advanced now on local stations is going to be that which Trump's FCC wants to happen. And let's look at that, right? Because Brendan Carr, as the chair of the FCC, has made it perfectly clear that he is going to take the Project 2025 agenda and he's going to shove it down your throats, whether you like it or not. And because he is there controlling levers of power at the FCC, he is going to make companies like CBS have to capitulate even more. Listen to what Carr said about this merger. Today's decision also marks another step forward in the FCC's efforts to eliminate invidious forms of DEI discrimination. He claims that Americans no longer trust the legacy national news media to report fully, accurately, and fairly. It is time for a change. That is why I welcome Skydance's commitment to make significant changes at the once storied CBS broadcast network. In particular, Skydance has made written commitments to ensure that the new company's programming embodies a diversity of viewpoints from across the political and ideological spectrum. End quote. Spare me. We know exactly what this means. This means that CBS has now become a propaganda machine for the Trump administration. I never thought I would live to see the day that what I call the Holy Trinity in media, ABC, CBS, and NBC, that one of those companies would fall so far from grace. And there are people in Congress, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, who have been fighting the good fight to make sure that the transparency has been given to the American people to understand how this billion-dollar merger could come to pass, absent some type of backroom deals going down. And that's why we had to have Senator Elizabeth Warren on with us here at the Katie Phang News Channel now to answer some of these questions and let us know her thoughts about this merger and what she thinks are the next steps. And as promised, we have Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Warren, thank you so much for joining us now at this moment. Before we actually came online, I was just having a conversation about how critical independent media is now going to be moving forward. But look, you've been on the forefront of this battle, seeking transparency regarding any potential, at the beginning, settlement between Paramount/CBS and Donald Trump. And then you led the charge trying to make sure that people understood that we needed legislation to curb the grift, which is sometimes impossible considering that it's the Trump administration, by your introduction of legislation that would prohibit money being given to presidential libraries, under the guise of these settlements. But now we're at the point where that $8 billion merger has now been approved between Paramount Global and Skydance Media. And as you predicted, it's walking like a duck, talking like a duck, sounding like a duck. Is this bribery?
Well, I think it certainly has a lot of suspicious parts to it, as you have rightly identified. Here's Donald Trump, who basically, as president of the United States, has a lot of favors at his disposal to give out. And he dangles this favor of approval of an $8 billion settlement that Paramount really, 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 really wants. And so what does Paramount start doing? They settle the lawsuit, as you identify, and not enough. Donald Trump then announces there's an extra $20 million in the deal in free advertising. Okay, that's starting to sound a little suspicious. And then when Stephen Colbert goes on his show and calls it, quote, a big fat bribe, 3 days later, the show is canceled. And to me, here's the cherry on the whipped cream. Donald Trump follows that up by saying he hopes he is the reason that Stephen Colbert got fired. And look, we worry about the corruption right here in the open for people to see that if we have a country where getting things approved in government really turns on who puts the most money in the president's pocket, then we have a democracy that breaks down. But the other half of that is what Trump is doing here is showing a dominance over the media. He's demonstrating that he can be tough. And that's the question. Trump has sued ABC, obviously. He's now sued CBS. He's suing the Wall Street Journal for enormous sums on what most people would call bogus lawsuits. And then it is the act of the settlement itself that raises this question of dominance, shutting down a free press, saying not just to the three individual parties or companies that got hit, but to the entire media in the United States and even around the world. You criticize Donald Trump and you run the risk that the entire power of the federal government, America's government, will come down on you. That's the concern here about what may be going on.
Yeah. And, the irony doesn't escape a lot of us. I like to say here at the Katie Phang News Channel, Senator, that I'm trying to build an ecosystem of high information Americans. I think if you are a high information American, then you're a better voter at the end of the day. The co-opting of the federal government to be able to be weaponized by somebody like Donald Trump is the greatest fear. And, this commission, the FCC commission, is made up of 3 members. The only one who voted against approving the licenses being sent over to be able to get this merger to go through was a Democrat. Her name is Ana Gomez. And I want to just briefly read out loud to you what she said. She said, quote, after months of cowardly capitulation to this administration, Paramount finally got what it wanted. Even more alarming, it is now imposing never before seen controls over newsroom decisions and editorial judgment in direct violation of the First Amendment and the law. Senator, I like to say that I traffic in facts and evidence as a trial lawyer and especially as a journalist. And in this instance, the lack of independence now moving forward with a legacy media giant like CBS, in conjunction with the very overt plans by FCC Chair Brendan Carr to make viewpoint diversity kind of a lie, right? There's no true diversity anymore when it's going to come to what comes out of CBS. How concerned should Americans be about the quality of the content that may be coming from something like CBS now?
Look, all you have to do is take a look at the media in places like China and Russia. And the media kowtows to the great leader. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of fluff and whatever it is that the great leader wants to be handed out to people, which means they've lost that ability to judge for themselves and the information they need to be able to protest, to be able to say, hey, that's not what I want, to be able to link up with each other and push back against a powerful government. It truly shifts power from what we built in a democracy, which is ultimately power rests with the people, over to, nope, power rests with the guy in charge. And a big move in that direction is to try to get media under control. So media not only doesn't report news you don't like, they don't tell jokes you don't like. Mm-hmm. They don't say anything that the great leader doesn't want said.
And Brendan Carr issuing a statement after the announcement of this $8 billion merger, which, by the way, we all know under this administration, the billionaires continue to get richer. And they're definitely taking advantage. It is open season on the American working class here. But Brendan Carr says that today's decision also marks another step forward in the FCC's efforts to eliminate invidious forms of DEI discrimination. I mean, Senator Warren, I'm not going to mince words here. It is an attempt by the Trump administration, maybe not an attempt, frankly, at this point, seeing this merger having been approved. But this is a very clear indication that this administration is moving this country towards a total whitewashing of views. That if you are now going to completely institutionalize anti-DEI concepts, policies, and it's going to be within our fourth estate, within our media, which is supposed to have independence from the other branches of government, how worried should Americans be that it's not just going to stop with CBS? We've seen ABC capitulate. I mean, what's next?
Well, you're right. It's throughout the media that we have to worry. But notice Donald Trump and his administration aren't even stopping with the media. The attacks on universities are ultimately attacks on people who are independent and who criticize and who raise uncomfortable facts and who are contentious. The attacks on law firms, big law firms, are attacks on the lawyers who actually sued Donald Trump in the past or helped those who had investigated Trump in the past. In other words, it appears to be an attack across the board on anyone or anything who tries to remain independent of President Trump and express their own view. So we really have to understand this moment as a lot more than just about one company merging with another. We have to understand it as a lot more than just an attack on one CBS news outlet. It's really in the context of Donald Trump working furiously and using every part of government to try to suppress those who disagree and who speak out.
You wrote an incredibly timely op-ed in Variety just on July 23rd, just right before the announcement of this $8 billion merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media, within which you reference the introduction of the Presidential Library Anti-Corruption Act to close at least one potential bribery loophole. And we don't have to, we don't even have to remind Americans about the jet from Qatar and the fact that these settlements are, quote, going to the presidential library. I mean, I don't, well, yeah, I will go there. I don't really think this man is even literate, but the fact that they're allowed to kind of tack this label on these payments, which smack of quid pro quo. You do this, you pay me this, I will give you this. I mean, in and of itself, it kind of screams corruption. How important is legislation like the one you're introducing going to be, not only for this administration, but moving forward?
Look, it's not going to solve all the problems here. I don't want to oversell,
No.
but Donald Trump has just demonstrated a great way for someone who's got business pending in front of Donald Trump, who wants a favor from Donald Trump, whether it's wants a business deal approved that one of the regulatory agencies has to approve. Maybe it's a pardon. Someone would like not to have to be considered a felon for the rest of their lives. Or maybe it's someone that has an ongoing investigation against them. That the Presidential Library slush fund becomes a way to transfer value to the person who's sitting in the White House and has these favors at his disposal to hand out. So what this bill says is, no, that has to come to a stop. So long as you are president, and let's be clear, whether you're Democrat or Republican, doesn't make any difference. So long as you are a president, you cannot solicit, you cannot accept money for this so-called presidential library. You can't do it. And after you leave and no longer have that power, you can solicit, but there are limits on how much people can give and complete transparency. So whatever money is going in has to be publicly reported. So, it's to try to cut off one new avenue that Donald Trump has carved that he can use for corruption to be able to enrich himself. And I think it's a good thing to do. And here's the thing, I get it. Republicans are in charge of the House and the Senate. But it's important to raise these things and say there are solutions to these problems. And to say to the Republicans one more time, grow a spine. Mm-hmm. You know what's going on is wrong. Come on, stand up. Here's a law. It's pretty straightforward. It would apply to Democrats and Republicans. Help us pass it right now. And then to say to them, if the answer is still no, why? Because that means you have to take some ownership for this corruption as well. So I want to say on this, I'm going to keep pushing on this piece of legislation, but it can't be me alone. It's all of us. We need to keep this issue front and center, the corruption and the attack on a free press. We fight back. We just keep talking about it. We keep posting about it. We keep organizing around it. We keep the pressure up. We are defending our democracy, and that's how we will make change.
And in large part in the defense of democracy and trying to make sure that we keep our foothold in the pro-democracy space is getting accurate, truthful information out, which is part of the reason why this merger gives us so much concern. I will say, and this is my adjective, not yours, Senator, this big bullshit bill that got passed. You have been making such a heartfelt effort to disseminate on your media platforms through your press office. You've been trying to make sure that Americans understand exactly how much of a negative impact this bill is going to be just on the basic daily needs for Americans. My biggest fear is now that you have something like Paramount Global, which is the parent company of CBS and its relevant assets, that now that you have something like Paramount Global merging with Skydance having David Ellison, who's a Trump cohort, hanging out. Now you have all this anti-DEA and all these commitments to making sure that Project 2025 agendas get advanced. Where can we continue to make sure that Americans understand what's at stake? Because it seems like, as you've noted, Donald Trump just keeps on wanting to cut us off at the bend because people need to know exactly what is happening, not only in DC, but how all of these decisions are going to be impacting them.
Right. Well, this is why your work is so important.
Thanks.
And this is why, no, I really mean this. This is the part that gives me hope, is that it's not just 3 channels out there. It's not just a dozen. It's that people like you who are independent, who are fierce, and who are not dominated by some multi-billion-dollar corporation that is willing to go to the president on bended knees because they want that $8 billion merger to go through. No, someone who is in this because it is a commitment to the truth. It's a commitment to getting the facts out. Look, I say it every chance I get. The Republicans just passed a bill and all voted for it to give tax handouts, breaks, giveaways, totaling nearly $4 trillion to a handful of millionaires and billionaires. And part of the way they want to pay for this is cutting health care for 17 million Americans. And I want to underscore, because it's already starting to roll in, raising the cost of health insurance for the rest of us who actually will be lucky enough still to have health insurance available to us. So making sure that people understand exactly what is going on becomes critical to the survival of our democracy. And that's why I'm grateful for the work you're doing and happy to be here today.
Well, thank you, Senator Elizabeth Warren, for taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy, but I also know that issues like this merger have been something that you have been kind of heralding and kind of leading the charge to make sure that that transparency has been out there. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I know that I speak for all Americans that we appreciate you fighting the good fight. You, like me, are a fellow cage rattler. So it's good to see you. And thanks again for your time.
Okay, thank you. And keep rattling those cages.
I will. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.